Welcome to the Mentor video series summary video for effective feedback, utilizing the mnemonic tool, the 5 Ps. Our learners treasure high-quality feedback. The problem is, most of their feedback looks like this. Great job, you should read more. And our learners, appropriately, recognize this type of feedback is useless. Fortunately, the 5 Ps is a tool you can use to guide you through an effective feedback encounter, as it incorporates many of feedback's best practices that we have learned from the literature. The first P is preparation. The second is purpose. The third P is probe, followed by perspective and plan. Let's go through each P one by one. Every effective feedback session really starts before the actual feedback encounter takes place. This is because many of feedback's best practices require us to be thoughtful and plan ahead. For example, you learn that feedback should not be judgmental, but rather should be information-based and observation-based. And that feedback should be specific so it is targeted. Additionally, we must be careful to not overwhelm our learner with too much information, and therefore, we must limit ourselves to only the most important observations to provide feedback on. Feedback should be timely and frequent, which requires us, as the educators, to be proactive. Expected, so as not to come as a surprise, and should take place in an appropriate setting. As you can imagine, doing all of these things requires careful preparation. And this preparation sets the stage for a successful feedback encounter. This brings us to our second P, purpose. We learned from Jack Endy that feedback at its heart, at its root, is an emotional encounter. And to help us with this aspect, we learned the golden secret of feedback from Kelly Skeff. First, they should know that you care before they care what you know. If your learners know and believe that you care, this will open their ears, their mind, and their hearts so that they are receptive to your feedback. For this reason, I often preface feedback encounters with, I just want you to know that everything I'm about to share is because I care about you, and because I want to help you become the best physician possible. And because it is an emotional encounter, we need to have empathy. We need to imagine ourselves in our learner's shoes and think back to when we were in their position, and then share some of our own similar struggles. This further opens their hearts and minds. The next P is probe. After explaining the purpose, we should probe the learner with open-ended questions for their thoughts. Is there anything in particular that has been difficult for you? Is there anything you have been struggling with? Is there anything that you think has gone exceptionally well? Is there anything you're feeling confident in? This portion of the 5 Ps pulls from motivational interviewing principles, which assumes the learner is the content expert. After we elicit our learner's thoughts, we then move on to the next P, perspective. This is where we share our perspective, what we have observed. At this point, we can purely focus on what the learner brought up, if we agree, or we can share some additional thoughts. Ideally focusing on one area for positive reinforcement and one area for improvement. We then ask the learner for their perspective. This is an important step to calibrate our observation with our learner's perspective, because we may discover that they are very different. Once we have both shared our perspectives, we choose what to focus on and we move on to the plan. Plan is our 5th P. The most important part of the plan is that it is actionable and realistic. It is helpful to first ask the learner their thoughts on the best steps forward, as this promotes the most buy-in and ownership by the learner. Once we have established a plan, we then set a time in the near future to follow up. At the follow-up meeting, we then do an abbreviated version of the 5 Ps, such that each cycle repeats and builds off the last. Subsequent encounters are usually brief, unless new areas for feedback are addressed. This brings us through the 5 Ps. On the mentor's website, you will find a link to a PDF which can be printed and cut into a pocket card. We trust you and your students will find this tool helpful. Additional schema for feedback include the 1-minute preceptor and the BID model, which can be found in the Clinical Preceptorship miniseries and the Procedural Skills miniseries, respectively. Happy teaching!